Once we've got that measured and checked off, it's time to take off our rocker arm assembly. If you take this off before measuring your valve lash, it's really hard to come back to this and measure a valve lash, so you want to do this first. Also, word of caution when you take this off. These 4 bolts that hold it on are position sensitive. The bolt that comes from the top middle likely should go back in the top middle if the person before you reassembled their engine correctly. The bolts on the sides here, they have a smaller flange on their heads, and they have to go back in the sides, otherwise your valve cover is not going to fit quite right. So this is another scenario where utilizing that cardboard and labeling things is very handy. So I'm going to go ahead and crack them all loose. I left this top one in a couple of turns yet, so that my rocker arm assembly doesn't just fall away. I'll take out my 2 side ones and the bottom one so I can show you for comparison purposes how they differ. So this is the bottom one. This is the side one. Notice how the flange diameter is smaller on the side one here. Okay? I need to be able to tell the difference to reinstall them in the proper locations, otherwise I'm going to have a heck of a time getting my valve cover sit properly. Okay, so for this, I'm going to take my cardboard, I'll punch some holes carefully, not poking myself, and I'm going to put them in the pattern, and my bottom bolt, I'll put in the bottom, I'll take my 2 side bolts, put them in the sides, okay, and then I'll label them. Left, right, bottom, top, and then I'll label them all rocker arm so that I know they're for the rocker arm assembly. And then lastly, I'll take this one out of there, and the whole rocker arm assembly will lift off. Put the bolt in the cardboard. I'm going to put this carefully in my locker so that I don't damage these machine surfaces. These are the 2 parts that I was just measuring the clearance on between here and the valve stem tip. And then these 2 little cups are where the push rods sat. Okay, the push rods go down to your tappets, which ride on the camshaft, and we'll get more into that in engine construction unit. Set that off to the side, put my bolt in the cardboard, and we keep moving forward here. Okay. Before I move the engine, I want to take out my push rods. My push rods, and like a lot of other pieces on our engine, these tips have wear surfaces. Just like my valve stem tips and my rocker arm tips, they have wear surfaces. The materials, the surfaces get used to rubbing against the other surface, and they kind of develop a common surface between the 2. And so it's really important that when we take apart an engine, any parts that we plan to reuse get put back exactly in the same location and in the same orientation we took them out in. If we mix and match and move around those wear surfaces, everything will be fine when we assemble our engine, but the engine will experience rapid wear on all those mismatched surfaces. We'll have, so our oil will load up with debris a little bit quicker as the components re-wear, as well as all our clearances that were set might now be out of whack due to that additional wear that happens from mismatched surfaces. So I want to make sure that I take the exhaust one out and I know which way is top versus bottom. I'm going to tape it down to my cardboard. So I'll get the tape in a moment here, but I'm going to put this on here and I'm going to label it EX for exhaust. I'm going to put top and I'm going to put bot for the bottom. Okay. And then I'm going to put a piece of tape across this to hold it in place. And I'm going to do the same thing for the intake push rod. So that way they don't get mixed up. Okay. So I'll take this out. I'll set that down. and then I will label that off camera. Next up is taking off the cylinder head, and that requires the removal of this bolt, this bolt, this bolt, and this bolt. 4 bolts. Okay. Underneath the cylinder head is a cylinder head gasket designed to seal the top of the cylinder in the engine, and it needs to hold in compression. Now, when these engines are assembled at the factory or during a proper reassembly, they are tightened down in a crisscross pattern. That brings the cylinder head down evenly and squishes it even on both sides at the same time. Okay? And it's also torqued in increments. So we would do like 50, 50, 50, 50, then 100, 100, 100, 100, then 150, 150, 150, 150, and then 200, 200, 200, 200, and bring it down as evenly as possible as we can just with using a ratchet. A lot of modern factories nowadays, they have fancy torque guns that would do all 4 at the same time. But if we were reassembling this in the shop, we're doing one at a time. We're doing it in steps and in an order, crisscross pattern. Generally good practice to loosen them in a crisscross pattern as well. We go get a 12 millimeter deep wall 1/2 inch drive socket for these, and we'll get them up. I like the deep wall socket for them since I don't need to use an extension. We definitely want to use the 1/2 inch drive because they're pretty tight. So we're going to want the longer handle of the 1/2 inch drive ratchet set counterclockwise to break them free. Doesn't really matter which one we start with. Just pick one to start with. I'm going to put my arm over the engine and I'm going to hold the crankshaft PTO here to kind of help stabilize and oppose what I'm doing with the ratchet to loosen that bolt. And I'm just going to couple of back and forth so that it's loose, and then I move to the next one. And since there's only 4 bolts, at least 2 of them have to be done adjacent to each other. I'm going to crack them all loose. Then I can come back, adjust my socket, and I can spin them out. Or I could even take and swap my 12 on my T-handle and spin them out even faster. If you try to use the T-handle to break them loose, you might loosen them. You might bend your T-handle, or nothing happens. So again, that's why I went with the ratchet. It just usually works easiest. Got my cylinder head bolts out. I'm going to pull these out and I'm going to stick these in my cardboard. Okay. Now the head should be loose. Some of your cylinder heads might come loose. Others might be a little bit stuck. If they're stuck, we get a little pry bar, and right in between the cooling fin and this spot right here, we can give it a little bit of prying action to help wedge it up. But most of them usually tip up without much work, or you might have to wiggle them a little bit. So I'll wiggle mine up and off, and when I flip it over now, okay, you can see the bottom side of my cylinder head. You can also see the cylinder head gasket. Okay, mine's stuck to the bottom side of the cylinder head. Some of your engines, it'll be stuck to the deck of your cylinder block. You'll also notice I have a couple of dowels too. Mine are stuck in the head. Some will stay in the block. Some engines will get one in the block and one in the head. Okay? Hopefully you have both. If not, make a note of that, and we'll see if we can't find you some ones that were accidentally left out when your engine was last assembled. But if your cylinder head gasket is stuck to either one, leave it there. Because like before, we're going to try to see how many reuses we can get out of those. Okay? For now, I'm going to just set this off to the side on a soft surface gently. This is a machine surface. We don't want any dings in this, so we got to handle it carefully. And I'm going to clear my area a little bit because the next step is to take the valves out of the cylinder head. And that can be a little bit tricky, and we want to have some room to work directly in front of us. So I'm going to move this off to the side. I'm going to put the cylinder head in front of me. I'm going to take a blue rag. I'm going to wad it up. I'm going to put it over the top of the valves in the combustion chamber here. Hold it down just like this. Okay? The objective here is to remove our valves from the cylinder head by releasing these valve spring keepers from the ends of the valve stems. If you take a closer look, I'll bring this up for you. See how they have like a keyhole shape? There's like a large hole there. We got to push it down and then slide it over so that it can pass over the end of the valve stem. First thing I want to do is I want to rotate it. So I'm going to have to push it down. They might also have some oil, or this one still has a little bit of assembly lube. So you might have to wipe it down a little bit. But I want this flat spot right here facing towards the center of the cylinder head. If I'm lucky, the rag will keep the valve from pushing down further. It also protects the bottom side of the cylinder head. If I'm lucky, I can just use my thumbs to press down and kind of pull back on it. Sometimes, because you got limited space to get in there, that's pretty tricky to do. So I find taking a 19 millimeter 3/8 drive deep socket, I can use more of my palm to push down and then tilt it a little bit as I push down, and it'll go down and over, and then it'll pop up for me. And now my keeper, my spring, and on my intake valve, my little oil baffle here can all come out, and then if I lift up the cylinder head, my valve should come out. It should pull out nice and easy. If it doesn't want to come out, that means there's a little burr in this groove, and we have to file it off before we can pull it out. Don't just pull it out, because that will scratch up the valve guide. We'll talk more about that in detail in class when we're covering engine construction. Okay. Same procedure for the exhaust valve. Make sure that's wadded up underneath the exhaust valve. Make sure the flat spot on your keeper is pointing towards the cylinder head, the center of the cylinder head. I'm going to try first with my fingers. Nope, not really coming loose. I noticed the valve moved down a little bit, so I'm going to reconfigure the rag so that the valve doesn't go down with the spring when I push on it. Take my socket, push down, over, and up. My other keeper, my other spring. The exhaust valve doesn't have an oil baffle on it, so that's it. And then I can push that out and this slides out. So now my valves are out of my cylinder head. My cylinder head's fully disassembled, ready for an inspection and cleaning in the next phase of our engine project. So I'm going to gently set that off to the side. My valves, while these springs look identical, on some engines they are not. And same thing with the keepers. Some engines they are identical, other engines they are not. So it's good practice to keep things together from the exact locations they came. So the spring goes on the valve, the keeper goes on the valve, and now I have like a little assembly. I can put them in the back of my locker and keep them safely together. Same thing for the intake. I put my oil baffle on, spring on, keeper on, and I'm going to set these in the back of my locker until we need them for the inspection phase. At this point, you should be at step 30, which is another instructor checkpoint. So make sure you go get that. And then we can bring the engine back over on the wood stand and we can finish disassembling the short block or the lower rotating assembly.